The battleship USS Mississippi was the pride of her crew, who affectionately referred to her as Missy. By the early 1920s, she was considered the flagship of the United States Pacific Fleet. She repeatedly won the United States Navy's coveted E for Excellence Award for her gunner and engineering prowess, often bearing a large letter E on her stack for all the world to see. Missy may have been a beloved warship and workhorse of the U.S. Navy for many years, but her record was hardly spotless. That's because she had the dubious honor of having one of her turrets explode not once, but twice, and in exactly the same way. Designated as BB-41, USS Mississippi was the second of 3 ships of the New Mexico class of dreadnought battleships. She was laid down at the legendary Newport News Naval Yard in Virginia in April 1915, being commissioned in December 1917, the same month that the United States declared war on Austria-Hungary, the main ally of Germany. She was heavily armed by the standards of that time, possessing a main battery of 12 14-inch 50 caliber guns mounted in 4 turrets, each bearing 3 guns. Each gun was mounted in a separate sleeve. There were 2 turrets aft and 2 turrets forward. The New Mexico class of dreadnoughts also had 12 5-inch 51 caliber guns on board, as well as 8 3-inch anti-aircraft guns and 2 submerged 21-inch torpedo tubes. The USS Mississippi possessed 13.5 inches of steel armor at the belt, with all her turrets protected with between 9 and 18 inches of armor plating. The conning tower had 16 inches of armor, with the deck enjoying a 3.5-inch layer of armored protection. She was a large ship too, being 620 feet or 190 meters in length and 97.5 feet or 29.7 meters across her beam. She could attain a maximum of 32,000 horsepower thanks to her 9 Babcock and Wilcox boilers and 4 screws driven by 4 Curtiss turbines. However, she wasn't terribly fast in the water, with a top speed of just 21 knots, equal to 24.1 miles or 38.7 kilometers per hour. On June 12, 1924, the battleship nicknamed Missy was conducting gun trials off the coast of California, about 40 miles south of Los Angeles. It was recorded as being a clear and crisp day. There were 2 other battleships of the Pacific Fleet conducting the same trials, the USS Tennessee and the USS Idaho. These trials were badly needed as her 14-inch 50 caliber guns were plagued with technical glitches. This was a big problem given that these guns were the primary armament on the majority of America's battleships at the time. The issues had to be resolved, hence the ongoing offshore trials. It was just before midday and on the 8th salvo that Gun 2 and Turret 2 suffered a rare event known as a flareback. This is when silk powder bags inserted into the breech catch fire and ignite other bags being loaded. In this case, 4 powder bags totaling 470 pounds or 213 kilograms of explosive powder caught fire. This resulted in the ignition of other bags being loaded. A chain reaction explosion ripped through the turret that shook the entire battleship. Theoretically, debris shouldn't have accumulated. Each barrel was blasted with pressurized air between firings so that debris could be expelled. However, there was a tendency for the middle barrel of each turret to get less of an air pressure burst than the barrels to its left and right. This explained why dangerous debris was still in the breech, even though the gun crew had assumed it was safe to reload. The ship's captain, W.D. Brotherton, had noticed that brownish smoke was wafting from the periscope holes of No. 2 turret. The salvos kept firing, but Brotherton knew something was horribly wrong, and so he sounded the fire alarm. He also shouted orders to cut all power, flood the magazines, and stop the ship altogether, but it was too late, and a huge explosion rocked the ship. The force of the explosion was so enormous that it welded 2 massive steel turret doors together. The fumes surrounding the turret were thick and highly toxic, making it impossible to reach any of the men, even for those wearing masks and oxygen tanks. Only 2 sailors in the turret firing room, J.F. Caviezel and Robert McCaven, were able to escape by diving through a 40-foot hatchway. However, the hatchway closed automatically behind them, thereby trapping any of the men who may have survived the blast in a cloud of flaming and toxic gas. Sailors in the upper chambers of the gun turret would have perished instantly. It was those in the lower chambers that were suffocated by being trapped in the toxic cloud. The explosion caused the deaths of 45 sailors and 3 officers. Dozens more on board were injured. It would be the deadliest naval disaster on the California coast during peacetime. The stricken battleship was able to make her way back to the port of San Pedro near Long Beach to the south of Los Angeles. The aptly named hospital ship, the Relief, pulled up alongside the battered battleship. Rear Admiral William V. Pratt almost immediately boarded the ship, and then it happened again. The 14-inch guns on No. 2 turret went off again, with the explosion rocking the entire district of San Pedro. Windows were shattered and 4 men behind the recoiling gun were critically injured. They were there to remove the lifeless body of the gun pointer, whose finger was still on the trigger of the gun. A shell from the Mississippi flew over the heads of shocked people on board the all-night party ship, the Yale, landing in the water just a few hundred feet away. Thankfully, it didn't explode on impact. This was not supposed to happen during peacetime, and so the Naval High Command did everything in its power to keep news of the accidental discharge in San Pedro Harbor from being leaked to the media. The funerals of 47 of the 48 men who died on the USS Mississippi took place 5 days later on July 17, 1924. Hundreds of officers wearing full-dress uniforms and enlisted sailors stood in a square around the coffins. A salvo of 21 rifle shots was fired while a Navy bugler played taps. Funeral rites were delivered by no other than Vice Admiral Pratt. Local clergymen protested vigorously about this, claiming that a layman had no right to deliver funeral rites, but Pratt ignored them, saying his men deserved that funeral rites be offered by the old man, as the vice admiral put it. An investigation would conclude that it was a faulty gas ejection system that prevented one of the gun's breech plugs from closing securely. This allowed a jet of flame to flash back into the powder-filled room, which ignited debris from prior salvos. Also, the crew had failed to check the gun bores and had shouted out, "Bore clear," when they shouldn't have done so. Lieutenant Thomas E. Zellers, the turret captain, was hailed as a hero of the disaster. Zellers had closed the doors to the ammunition hoist and flooded the magazines, which saved the ship from worse disaster. His hand was still clutching the flood control handle when his body was discovered. A United States Navy destroyer would later be named in honor of Zellers. There's another slight twist to the day's events. The gunners on all 3 battleships were competing for a $20 prize, about $370 adjusted for inflation, which had been set by Congress. The prize was to determine the fleet's most proficient naval marksman. Of the 3 battleships, the USS Mississippi had the best record for gunnery awards, and just the day before, had hit 52 out of 55 targets. There was of course much excitement among the gunners on all 3 ships to try and win bragging rights as the best gunnery. Could perhaps all that excitement on board with running gunnery targets have diverted attention away from what was going on in the turrets? Did Congress inadvertently create the conditions for the massive explosion to occur? That's unlikely, given that gun trials have always been common in any navy. And then it happened again. During the Second World War, the USS Mississippi was part of the U.S. Navy's massive fleet in the Pacific. On November 20th, 1943, she was off the coast of Makin Island giving support to landing troops during the Gilbert and Marshall Islands campaign. The ship, along with others, was bombarding Japanese forces on the island. And, unbelievably, it was during the barrage that a flareback happened once again. The gas injection system had been switched off and reloaded too soon. And, yet again, the catastrophic event happened inside Gun 2 in turret number 2. A massive explosion occurred, this time killing 42 sailors and wounding 16 others. And this wouldn't be the last time this type of turret explosion occurred. Almost the exact same explosion occurred in 1989 on board a battleship, the USS Iowa, off the coast of Puerto Rico. That explosion claimed the lives of 47 sailors and injured 16 more. After World War II, Missy would have 3 of her 4 main battery turrets removed and would be equipped with a number of radars and prototype air defense missile systems. She would be decommissioned in 1956 and sold for scrap. Nearly 40 years old by then, the USS Mississippi had claimed the lives of nearly 100 of her own sailors in 2 separate explosions nearly 20 years apart that were literally identical.